What do hairdressers, investments, the Brooklyn Bridge, and weddings have in common? Sacre bleu. Another episode of the Gilded Age. Hey everyone, this is D Movie Man, fellow cinephile, popcorn addict, and emerging film critic, coming to you with reliable recaps, reviews, and reactions. And today, of course, I am coming to you all with another episode of The Gilded Age, Season 2, Episode 5, Close Enough to Touch. This episode was directed by Michael Engler and written by Julian Fellows and Sonja Warfield. So we open up this episode in Newport, seeing Bertha making preparations for her grand event centered around none other than His Grace the Duke. This also includes borrowing footmen from Mrs. Depew and Mrs. Fish, as well as the many that will be arriving from 61st Street. Bertha does encounter an unexpected hitch amidst these preparations when Larry and one of his friends make a drunken arrival home. Although she had planned for him to attend the event, with antics like these, she'll now be sending him right back to 61st Street. Larry suggests that his mother is enjoying his heartbreak over Mrs. Blaine, but Bertha reassures him that this is far from the truth, as she only wants the best for her children. She also makes an inquiry with Mrs. Bruce into a lady's maid that could potentially help her with her tiara. While Adelheid may have made progress with herself and Gladys, this night is far too perfect to leave to chance. And in the end, Mrs. Bruce does eventually find a hairdresser, not only for Bertha, but also who will be there to attend the other ladies if they are in need throughout the night. Adelheid is clearly frustrated by this, but like I said, Bertha is not willing to let anything slip through the cracks. We then see Maud Beaton and Aurora having a conversation about Oscar and his annoyance at having not been invited to Bertha's event with the Duke. Maud knows that this is likely because of the whole situation with Gladys, and Aurora says, well, it's not like he would want a man that had never been interested in a woman before. Regardless, it is clear that Maud has some interest in Oscar, but she's clearly worried if he's simply a fortune hunter. And as far as Aurora is concerned, it's best that Maud really take her time and get to know Oscar in a deeper way before she makes any rash decisions. And I agree. Speaking of Oscar, we see him hanging with Marion and co. when Ada decides to bring forth a very important announcement. She will be marrying Reverend Forte. Although Agnes is certain she has misheard her sister, she is significantly more shocked when she realizes that not only has she not misheard her, said wedding will be taking place next week. This all seems pretty rushed to Agnes, but for Ada, considering that she's waited her entire life for this, a long engagement is not necessary. What also will not be necessary is Agnes's presence, as she does not plan on attending. Surprise, surprise. And apparently Oscar won't be attending either, as Agnes has now expressly forbid him to attend, which also means that Ada's plans for him to walk her down the aisle are officially kaput. Agnes does not understand what Ada could possibly know about the duties of marriage or being a wife, because she is a spinster and always has been. I was just like, okay. Time out, flag on the play, unnecessary roughness. Number one, to reiterate, being a spinster, again, despite the stigma, being a spinster was actually not a negative thing. Most of the time, it meant a lot of these women were living lives that most women during that time were not permitted to have. Having your own money, your own house, a fairly independent life, and not having to be ruled over by anyone. Yeah, that doesn't sound like a punishment to me. But on the flip side, as someone who has lived that life, clearly Ada is ready for something new and something different, and with someone who seems to care about her just as much as she cares about them. So the fact that she's now in that position and in that headspace, why are you punishing her and demeaning her for that? Not even Bannister can escape Agnes's wrath, as he is quickly forced to rescind his congratulations on Ada's engagement. Next, we see Oscar detailing his family drama to Maud, as he offers his services as an advisor in her investment meeting. This includes plans to take over the Chicago and Atlantic Railway, which Maud would be potentially investing her money in. It's clear that Mr. Crowder, who is overseeing this deal, is very much uncomfortable with Oscar's presence and his knowledge about the deal and everyone attached to it. But as long as he keeps quiet, all will be well. Oh, Oscar has no problem keeping quiet about the deal as long as he can invest himself. This is despite it being a close partnership with a limited number of investors. Well, it seems as if that number has just increased. Uh-oh. After a brief moment where Marion takes her aunt to task by suggesting her true anger with her sister is that she is no longer at her beck and call, we see, surprisingly, Agnes visiting the Reverend. And even more surprisingly, she is very contrite and very vulnerable in her conversation with him. Well, that is after she tells the Reverend that despite his surprise at having fallen in love at his age, love cannot survive marriage. While the Reverend understands what Agnes is saying, he reinforces that this is her experience. So my take on things is that in addition to what Agnes obviously feels about her sister and then, this dynamic between them changing, I do think there's a little bit of resentment, with Agnes because she was forced into marriage. It was not something she should have had to do, but we know that their brother squandered their money and all of a sudden she had to become a Van Ryn. And from what we learned from Ada last season, it was not a pleasant situation. He was not a good man, and I can only imagine what Agnes had to go through being married to him. So I think that the idea, and I also think part of it is that she went through that so that Ada wouldn't have to, but then now Ada gets to just marry for love and with someone she cares about, and she gets to, enter into this part of her life in a completely different way. And I think there's a little bit of like, okay, that's kind of not fair. You know what I'm saying? Which is selfish, but I kind of get it. But then on the flip side, it's like, hey, this is someone who has been a significant part of my life. Not even just my sister or sibling, but like a companion, a friend, And when we become accustomed to people being around, we can sometimes forget just how important they are to us until the dynamic changes and they're gone. And I understand that more than anybody because the different friendships I've had, and that's not the same as a familial bond, but still understanding how my relationships with people have changed when they have entered into relationships, engagements, marriages, children, and so on. It's just like life isn't going to be the same, and it's hard, but you have to allow people to go forward in life, and it just can't be about what you're used to anymore. The Reverend makes it clear that he is not going anywhere, and ultimately it is up to Agnes if she decides whether or not to be a part of their lives. And when she hears scripture, she realizes that if God is going to have the last word on this, it's best she go ahead and leave. After Larry's arrival back in New York, and after a brief conversation with Marion, we see him having a discussion with his father about his position as a trustee of the Brooklyn Bridge. The bridge is almost finished, but with everything going on with the strikes, George needs Larry to step in as a representative, primarily to speak to Mr. Roebling, who, despite being the chief engineer of the project, never seems to be present as the work continues on. And he does not seem to learn much more when he speaks to Norman Tate in Mr. Roebling's home and discovers that Mr. Roebling is in fact in Newport. But Larry is no fool, And upon his return visit, he has figured out that it is in fact, surprise, surprise, Mrs. Roebling is in fact spearheading this project and making all the necessary contributions to its progress. Most of this she learned during the trip that she and her husband took to Europe to learn about various aspects of the project, including stress analysis, cable construction, catenary curves, and much more. She and her husband were all set to take over the project when her father-in-law passed, who of course was initially commissioned for the project, but then her husband also fell ill. To avoid his being replaced by the board, she decided to soldier on, and now, here we are. Now, within the confines of the show, this information is not something they wanted everyone to know due to the public outcry that it would likely cause. But reality was a little bit different. Of course, although there is not nearly enough time to mention all of this on the show, for those of you who don't know, yes, you know what that means. After the death of his father, John A. Roebling, it is Washington Roebling who became chief engineer. During his tenure, he made several important improvements on the bridge design and further developed bridge building techniques, including the two large pneumatic caissons that became the foundations for the two towers. Working in the compressed air in these caissons under the river caused him to get the bends, also known as decompression sickness. Yet and still, he was able to oversee the bridge to its completion with the immutable contributions of his wife Emily, whose work on the project was actually well known. On opening day, she was on the first carriage from the Brooklyn side, carrying a rooster to indicate victory. We then see George and Mr. Clay having a brief discussion about the strikes, which are now beginning to center around 8-hour workdays. Although it's clear there's a small part of George that wouldn't mind relenting, Mr. Clay is relentless. He believes that if they concede now, not only will it lead to financial ruin, but to violence, bloodshed, and even death. To concede now would spell weakness, and weakness is the harbinger of chaos. I was like, so is stubbornness? But sure, I'll let you have it. Later, in Tuskegee, we see the official opening ceremony for the A.H. Porter Dormitory. Peggy then speaks to one of the attendees, David, about what it feels like to have had a hand in building the dormitory. It's a very moving and emotional experience for him, but ultimately his central feeling is pride. He also hopes after he graduates to have a farm that he will use to support the family business, which is a restaurant that his mother owns. He hopes to supply the restaurant with a harvest from the crops on his land. He also invites them to visit his mother's restaurant later, and they decide to take him up on it. They have a discussion over dinner, and Peggy is just so inspired by everything she's seen. Sadly, but unsurprisingly, the good times come to a quick end when two white men make their way inside the restaurant and demand food from Mrs. Sturt, the owner. When tensions rise and one of the men becomes physical with Mrs. Sturt, Mr. Fortune does what he can to step in and defuse the situation. This doesn't really help, and he and Peggy are surprised to discover that the man in question is Mason Sturt, the county commissioner, who also appears to share the same name as Mrs. Sturt. This is presumably because this is someone who used to own her as a slave. When the other man attempts to manhandle Mr. Fortune has no problem fighting back. But now realizing just how deadly the consequences will be of what has just happened, Peggy and Mr. Fortune quickly make their way out of the restaurant and just as quickly depart Mr. Washington's home. They are then taken by one of Mr. Washington's friends to shelter where they can hide out before they make the train the next morning. Although they come dangerously close to being discovered at their hideaway in a barn, eventually the men move on, leaving them undetected. As I said before, Peggy's somewhat privileged life in the North has not prepared her for this reality, even with her mother's warnings. But before she can fully embrace the reality of what has just happened. She is suddenly embracing Mr. Fortune as they share a kiss.
No. No. No, 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 no.
Now, I know you are lying to me, okay? Like, I get it. We've been hinting, but I just figured it was going to be like a false lead or a false start, or just like, ha ha ha, we're going to make it think, and then we're just going to like, no. But here we are. And I don't really know how to feel about it. I get that no characters are perfect, and we need some drama, some juice, some scandal, but oh, not Peggy. Not Peggy, no. I'm just very curious to see what the consequences for this are going to be. If nothing else, just for the dynamics of their relationship, because that is also her employer. So it's just like, oh, like we're stacking up the shenanigans and the foolishness and the mess of it all. So yeah, I'm very curious to see how Peggy is going to get out of this one. Over in Newport, we see the event of the season commencing. And unsurprisingly, it is nothing short of an extravaganza. I also didn't get to say this before, but I must say I really do love the marble that's in Bertha's foyer or foyer, depending on, of course, the American or European pronunciation. But I am definitely a marble fan. A little bit of marble goes a long way. And I already said last year, or last season, that I was a fan of those blue marble fireplaces. So yes, bring on the marble. I am always here for it. All the regulars are in attendance at the event, except, of course, Mrs. Astor, who conveniently couldn't make it. Mr. McAllister informs Bertha that the only way to win a war is to bring out your biggest weapon. And since she officially has a duke on deck, I think she is right on track. What Mr. McAllister does not know is that Bertha also has a secret weapon, and her name is Gladys. Bertha has made it a point to take charge of Gladys's styling for the event, in addition to positioning her right next to the Duke at the dinner table. I think it's safe to say what her intentions are here. It's also safe to say that there are some unspoken intentions being exposed in the kitchen when Watson sees Mr. Schneider pour something into the sauce. Whatever it is, it proves to be a fairly revolting concoction when tasted by Borden and Co. Thankfully, the first course is canceled and Schneider is dismissed. But there is still treachery afoot, as Watson senses that something is not quite right with Peter Burns the footman. If Peter Burns looks familiar, it's because we saw him previously basically bashing or really like spilling the teacup, if you will, about Turner / Mrs. Winterton and how she came to meet Mr. Winterton and how her actions were not above board. Shall we say? But again, thankfully, a crisis is narrowly averted when Church makes his way over to Peter Burns and grabs the soup that was clearly about to make its way into the Duke's lap. First of all, let me say that Watson needs a raise ASAP. Like, he single-handedly was the reason all of that was avoided. He was like he had his eye out. He was looking. He knew. He was just like, And this is another reason why he does not need to go to San Francisco. Like, someone with eyes who is really, like, paying attention. So, yeah, I'm going to need you to give my man Watson his things, please, and thank you. It's interesting because I thought the plan initially, at least from the preview, I thought the plan was for the soup to spill on Bertha, which I suppose would have been really humiliating and embarrassing. But when I think about it, well, it would have been significantly worse for something to spill on the guest of honor. So yeah, regardless, in the end, all is well for everyone, that is, except Mrs. Winterton. Even Mrs. Fish seems to detect something wrong with Mrs. Winterton, as she now appears to be fairly agitated. I know I've said it before, but I love Mrs. Fish. I love the actress's performance, and it's just like, it's not even like she does a whole lot. And to me, sometimes those are the most interesting characters. Like, we have our main players, but the characters that just pop up and just like can say so much with these little glances and expressions and these brief lines. Please, more Mrs. Fish. Yes, I love it. So, in the end, dinner is a success. But this is something that Mrs. Winterton will never admit, not even if her fingernails were torn off to make her. Well, one can dream. So throughout the episode, we see Ada struggling with her decision to marry the Reverend, aka Luke, and she even wonders if the wedding should be postponed. When the Reverend then suggests she speak to Marion, he proves to be right on target, because Marion tells her that Ada has done nothing wrong and that she cannot take the opportunity to spoil her future. Besides, if she's worried about Oscar not being there to walk her down the aisle, then Cousin Dashiell, as always, will be there to step in. As Marion, Ada, and Dashiell head off to the cathedral for the ceremony, it is clear that Agnes is still not budging. But in the end, it's her loss. Even Bannister recognizes this, as he urges Agnes to support her sister, lest she regret it for the rest of her life. And Bannister is not someone who speaks out of turn, okay? So if he even recognizes it, and he's like, oh well, get out your feelings, then that's really saying something. The turnout for the wedding ends up being far more than Ada ever expected, which also includes Oscar, who is there to walk her down the aisle after all. But before the ceremony can begin, we see the one and only Agnes making her way into the sanctuary, much to the surprise and happiness of her sister. And despite the confusion, frustration, and general uncertainty that has preceded this day, in the end, it appears that Ada has, at last, finally found her happy ending. Well, at least somebody finally has. And that closes out episode 5, Close Enough to Touch. The drama continues. Oh, this show. It keeps giving me so much I didn't know I needed. I love digging into the history. I love period pieces, costume dramas. Like, it hits on so many different levels for me, and it's just fun. And I love the fact, and I've said this before, but it's just lighthearted enough to where it's not like super, super dark or super like, oh gosh, and granted, in this episode, we saw enough because I certainly had my level of irritation and anxiety during Peggy's whole segment in more ways than one. But yeah, it's never anything so deep that it's like, gosh, this is depressing and dark. But then, it's just like, it's a good balance for me. And I'm just interested to see where everything goes. I'm sad we only have eight episodes, but yeah, but still enjoying the show. Let me know, of course, your thoughts and just how the season is progressing for you guys. Feel free to let me know down below. How's the season for you, and how do you think it compares to season 1 thus far, and how do you think it's going to end? Of course, I'll probably circle around to that question again later at the end. But of course, as always, please feel free to drop down below and let me know your thoughts on this recap and the episode in general. So, once again, this is D, Movie Man, signing off, and I'll see you at the movies.